Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk, back again with you guys for another episode of our tactical breakdown series, show in which we look at the players that have been linked to Arsenal in a statistical and analytical way with the help of some expert insight. Thank you for joining us for this evening's show, where we'll be focusing on Gianluca Scamacca from Sassuolo, and of course an Italian international as well, a player that's been rather heavily linked to the Gunners over the past week or so. Initially, reports from Repubblica in Italy claiming that Arsenal had made a €35 million bid that had been rejected and that the player wasn't ever so keen on a move. However, there were more reports to come from that, which clearly stated that that wasn't the case. Arsenal still certainly have an interest in the player, but also that the CEO, Giovanni Carnavelli, has pointed out that no bid has supposedly been made at this point. So lots of conflicting reports at this stage, but enough that I felt it was necessary for us to take a look at who Scamacca is. And to do that, of course, we'll be doing it with the usual insight from our Italian resident expert, Rich Hall, which I'm going to introduce to you in a second, and then go into the player statistics and comparisons with other players similarly to him in the same position at Arsenal and that have been linked to Arsenal as well. If this is a first show that you've not tuned into before, we do these for all of Arsenal's transfer targets throughout the transfer window, and we'll continue to do so throughout it. So make sure you drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you're new. We'll then be going to our live chat box for a bit of a reaction and Q&A session at the end of the show. But first of all, we kick off, as always, with our expert insight, and I'm very happy to welcome back again Rich Hall to present his thoughts about Gianluca Scamacca. However, I must start off with an apology that in today's episode with Rich, there is no fantastical Italian random football shirt. It's just plain Rich. But other than that, some really good insight.
Good to be back again with you guys. Now we're looking at Gianluca Scamacca, who is identified as Arsenal as a good alternative to Gabriel Jesus, according to the English papers, of course. The Corriere dello Sport have reported it today that this is something that could actually happen, but they will face competition. Arsenal will face competition from Inter, who are looking to also secure his signature. Now, some of the English press I've heard touting figures of €50 million. It doesn't sound quite right, because Sassuolo will sell players. They will sell players. They will sell one major person per year. We've seen that with Locatelli in the past. We've seen it. Berardi is constantly linked, and Frattesi and Scamacca as well. So where do we go from here then? Well, it looks as though Inter will be very active, especially when they got a lot of people off the books. But the links to Lukaku may really change this, so it might be beneficial for Arsenal. What can I tell you about him? At 23 years old, he has room to develop, but he is a very, very big talent and could potentially be one of Italy's main stars of the future, leading that front line. Physically good, I think good, but could still bulk up a little bit. I think that would help his game, because I think that whilst he is quite good in the air, quite good at holding the ball up, it does need some more work, and I think that him building a better physique would do that. Quite sharp in the turn, acceleration of pace is good. I don't think personally, as you guys know, well, if you've listened to this before, I host the official Inter podcast. My one thing of him coming to Inter would have been, what about the lack of goals? I'm not sure whether he's clinical enough, but at 23, I think he can get there. If you take a comparison, I also thought that about Lautaro Martinez, but at the time Diego Milito had said, no, this guy, if you play him and you continue with him, he'll do really well. So it is the unknown, but he's 23. And again, I've mentioned this before, that in Italy, the young players don't always get as much time as they probably deserve, but at Sassuolo, they do that. They play a very good football, Sassuolo, as well. So he will be used to Arsenal style of play as well, because it is trying to keep that ball on the ground, keep it passing, quick touches and go. So, yeah, I actually think it's a really good deal if Arsenal can get this done, because I don't think it's a massive risk. Like I said, I think that his value will only increase. Also, when you look at his career, very strange not upbringing, but he was at Lazio and Roma, which is weird in itself, but that's a whole different conversation. But also he spent time in the Netherlands as well. This is a guy who doesn't mind to travel, doesn't mind to do look for different experiences. So I don't think that part of it will be bad at all. I really think that if he just could add this little bit of sharpness, and that little bit of extra physicality, which, you know, going to the Premier League would probably at least partly help him, that he's tactically quite astute and could be a good signing. So let's see, but definitely competition from Inter.
A massive thank you for that from Rich. As always, you can check him out on Twitter at RichHall80 to keep up to date with all the latest Italian football news. He does a lot of work for Inter Milan and Fiorentina, of course, as well, and is the main guy at the Gentleman Ultra who contribute to the Guardian newspaper. So plenty of insight from Rich, and is definitely worth a follow on the socials. Yeah, really interesting to hear, especially kind of his backstory in the Netherlands. You know, he was at Lazio and Roma, as Rich mentions there, and then went to the PSV Youth Academy and came through there. That's when he kind of got his break into senior football before he was bought by Sassuolo on a 4.5-year deal. He then went on a number of loans to Cremonese, to PEC Zwolle, again back in the Netherlands, Ascoli, and then more recently Genoa, where he made his breakthrough really into Serie A. And then Sassuolo decided to keep hold of him for this season just gone, where he scored 16 goals and has therefore got more interest in him from elsewhere, including Arsenal. Our next section of the show, as always, is to go into his stats. So let's have a look at how he compares. We look at him as kind of the non-penalty goals end of the spectrum. He's one of the higher scoring individuals for that bracket of non-penalty XG and goals for a striker in his position. A striker in his position, of course. A striker in his position. A player in his position. Shots, he ranks very highly as well in the 84th percentile. But then you start going into the other areas, and there is clear areas for development. You know, his assists can definitely go up. He didn't get a single assist in Serie A last season. You'd imagine that Arsenal, that would be more, you know, we'd be more demanding of him to be more creative. But what I would say is him as a player, he's very, very willing to get involved in the build-up. You know, whilst he's not laying on the final pass for a fellow winger to score, it's kind of that pre-assist that Mesut Ozil was obviously so well known for. He's really involved in the build-up of games, takes the ball, turns quick, plays it out into the wide areas really nicely. He's not just an isolated figure in the box like many people may misinterpret him as, because he doesn't have those assists. Certainly from speaking to further experts and watching more into him, he does get involved very much so with the build-up, and I think that's probably one of the big reasons why Mikel Arteta has been drawn towards him. In terms of player comparisons, we're going to take a look at how he compares, of course, to our main striker target in Gabriel Jesus and Eddie Nketiah, but also another Serie A tall striker that has been linked to Arsenal in Tammy Abraham, that I thought would be the best player in regards to kind of look at a similar profile of forward, and only scored the one extra goal. We'll come on to that in a second, though. Looking at the heat map, as you can see, whilst he's got that heat map and intensity in the box, you can see that there isn't always just solely there. You look at a player like Tammy Abraham, the majority of his time is spent inside the box and obviously in the centre circle when taking centre kicks. But actually, what Scamacca's got is that draw into the slightly skewed to the right-hand side, coming back and taking the ball when necessary and getting involved with the build-up, whereas you've got players like Jesus who tend to skew to the right when he plays in those wide areas and get into the box off of the main middle part because of his positioning. And Nketiah, though, is more of that fox in the box and a really clinical finisher when the ball gets to his feet in those dangerous positions. He finished the season really, really well in regards to how many goals he outperformed his XG. You know, he was expected to score 11.6 goals, ended up with 16 and outperformed. Now, sometimes XG can be looked at in a sense of, wow, he's outperformed his XG, he's overachieving. And if he was to move to Arsenal, perhaps he wouldn't have scored that many. But what I would like to think is in the sense that he's actually, from the shots that he's had, he's outperformed those. And that can be looked at as a good thing. I suppose, yes, the argument against that also flows. And someone like Tammy Abraham with an XG of 20.5 comes out higher in this sense. But perhaps that's a reason why Tammy Abraham's price is around double that of Scamacca's. Looking at the amount of shots he takes per game, he actually comes out the highest here with 2.94. But despite taking more shots than anyone else per 90, he's also got the highest accuracy of shots at 14.3%. What's nice to see as well that deviates him away from the other strikers on this list is variation in the success rate of the shots from not just inside but outside the box. You know, taking shots from outside, you got 3 goals in his 16 from outside the area, but plenty of those efforts from outside the box are on target too. He's got range. He's got diversification to his shots. And I think that's certainly an aspect that maybe Arsenal lack in a striker right now. Looking at assists, as we've already mentioned, hasn't assisted, hasn't really attempted to create too much either, with just a 0.05 with that final pass. But as I said, it's a little bit deceiving because he does get involved with the link-up play and the build-up as well, which is difficult to represent in these types of stats here. Going into the aerial duels, where we think he would be very good, and, you know, he kind of is 47.7% of aerial duels he's winning, but not getting involved in as many as maybe he could do. Tammy Abraham, for instance, getting involved in 5.19 aerial duels per game, whereas Scamacca's down there at 3.37. When speaking to a number of people, and of course Rich, you heard from a second ago, it is part of his game that people would like to see him improving, get a little bit more physical, a little bit more bulky. And I think actually coming to Arsenal and working with our set piece coach, Nicholas Jova, as I've written about, will be an article coming out tomorrow on football.london, that it's certainly something that I think would be a perfect pairing for Scamacca. Try saying that 10 times when you're drunk. With Nicholas Jova, I think it would work out quite nicely. In terms of dribbles, doesn't tend to dribble anywhere near as much as the likes of Tammy Abraham and Nketiah and Jesus are the lowest by far, 2.12. When he gets the ball, he turns, he plays it off, he passes it out, he gets involved in the build-up that way. He's not the type to pick up the ball and drive at the opposition like Gabriel Jesus with the ball at his feet. And finally, looking at his pressures, actually doesn't come out too badly. Isn't as high in terms of pressures as that as Nketiah. It's definitely still holding his own here, higher than that of Gabriel Jesus, who is thought of as a hard-working player. Tammy Abraham as well. But you've got someone like Scamacca putting in 14.34 pressures per 90. Not in terms of success rate of those pressures leading to a turnover of possession, just 24.3%, which is lower than that of Nketiah and Tammy, significantly so, and around that of Gabriel Jesus. But it's good to see him keeping up with those despite having that kind of more lankier frame and that higher frame, which is sometimes associated with less movement and mobility in a forward. I think he comes out really well in these comparisons, and actually as a player to come into Arsenal would offer Arsenal plenty of contrasting characteristics to what we already have at the club. And that does complete all of the breakdown that we've got, which means we'll lean into the chat box and get some of your comments and your theories about Scamacca and some of your reaction to it as well. So let's kick on with that. And let's go to Peter, who says, I'm worried about his assists. It means he can't link the play up. And again, Peter, this is something that we've maybe touched upon and hopefully has given you a little bit of insight, because I, for one, have felt as, you know, fallen to this as well, that seeing no assists means they can't link up play. It's not true. A player with 0 assists doesn't instantly mean they can't link up the play. It does mean that they're not laying on those final balls for other players around them, but he does link the play. He does get involved in the build-up. Speak to anyone that's watched him across the season, and they will tell you that he does indeed get involved. And Sassuolo play that way, that he needs to get involved with the link-up. It's just not he's laying the ball on a plate for his fellow teammates in those crucial moments. Perhaps because when he receives the ball in those areas that would potentially lead to an assist, he instead chooses to take the shot. You might call that selfish, but he's got a very good shot accuracy rate and a very good goal record in Serie A as well. So perhaps he's earned it. Haj says, from what I remember, Giroud's hold-up play wasn't great when he started out at Arsenal either. And yet he, of course, now reacting to this, turned into one of the better kind of hold-up, link-up play players that we had at the clubs. A number of assists he laid on a plate in the FA Cup finals, for instance, certainly worthy of a mention. Lucas says, can you drill down even further when he's on loan at Italy and in the Netherlands? Well, when he was on loan at Genoa the season before last, he scored 8 goals in 26 games. So he's doubled his goal output in Serie A across 2 seasons. A great exponential growth that we've seen there. Playing for Ascoli, he scored 9 in 33 games. Didn't score whilst in 2018-19. That was 3 years ago when he was 20 years of age for PEC Zwolle. Hard one to say. He didn't score only in the 8 appearances that he had. He scored 1 time in the 14 appearances for Cremonense when he was 19 years of age. But I think, you know, you've seen that development now. And the season before last, at Genoa, getting those 8 goals, came into Sassuolo's team last season, scoring 16. It's showing that progression as well. The man is not afraid to shoot. You're not wrong, Elliot. He certainly is not afraid to shoot by any means whatsoever. Constantine says, can we sing Jesus and Scamacca together? If we can get both of those players in, I think that represents a really strong statement duo of signings for Arsenal to make during this window. Deep 11 says, why didn't I get a notification? I'm fuming. Well, I'm hopefully going to give you the insight in the fact that we're going to be trying to do these shows at 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. on most days. So even if YouTube doesn't notify you, hopefully now you know when the times are for typically when we'll be going live. I also tried to put these up on your timeline so you can see them on YouTube if you're checking your timelines and your subscription feeds, with plenty of warning. The Sox guy says, had you heard of him before this season? I worry sometimes we're going with flavour of the month. I'd heard of him at the end of the season before last from what he was doing at Genoa, because there was a lot of talk about how he would then react to playing for Sassuolo this season. So I had heard of him from his time at Genoa, not heavily by any means, and it was always going to be an interesting season to see how he performed. So yes, I had heard of him prior to this season, but he wasn't certainly up there. And typically for a 22-year-old Italian, you know, the Italian league is not typically known for its homegrown talent during this current era of football. Countries like England, Germany, France, Spain have always tended to outstrip Italy. It's only players you think of like Tonali, for instance, at AC Milan, that have really come through. Italians are thought of as young, as Rich said, at 23. That's not typically the case in countries like England and Germany and France. You know, your teenagers are your young players, not your early to mid 20-year-olds. It's just because the Italian national team hasn't tended to give those opportunities out too freely. It's taken time for Chiesa to be given those chances. It's been time for Scamacca now to be given those chances. They've lent on the experience of Chiellini and Immobile and players like this. So it's an interesting kind of thing when it comes from Serie A about these young players, that we don't tend to hear about them until later on. Whereas if it was, say, a 23-year-old in Germany that we'd only just started to hear about, perhaps there would be more credence to an argument about having some suspicions over him being a flavour of the month, as you've put it there. Scrolling down a little bit more, Vlad says, from all the solid links we've heard so far, it really looks like Arteta has his mind set on a big, strong number 9 up top, whether that's Scamacca, Calvert-Lewin or Nunez or Osimhen or, of course, Tammy Abraham as well. It does seem that kind of profile is what he's after, unsurprisingly so, to be honest. And even Gakpo, as well as a wide player, has got that physicality. He wants some power up top, and I don't blame him, because it's certainly a characteristic that I think has been lacking from the Arsenal striking department for quite some time, since Giroud left earlier in the season. Byron says, Saliba lays it off to Xhaka, who finds Saka out wide, Scamacca in space. What a ball from Saka. Goal for the Arsenal. I'm loving this predictive commentary. If only that turns out to be the reality for us next season, that'd be great. Doom Dealer 9 says, this guy has a little of a Vlahovic about him, and I really hope it is a trend that points towards what we are looking for. Me too. I agree with you. Ryan said, I watched Scamacca a few times this season. This guy's an absolute must buy. Lucas says, is Balotelli the same kind of profile as Scamacca at the same age? I think Balotelli had more movement about him, and a lot more, arrogance, of course, about him. A little bit of something personality-wise. I'm struggling to remember Balotelli when he was at Inter Milan before he made that move to Manchester City. My Serie A watching was not at its peak back then. But I suppose, the height-wise, the goal-scoring rate, they're kind of similar, I suppose, but I wouldn't be able to give you a definitive answer on that. Harry Symeou certainly might, though. Sean says, hi, Tom. At this point, this may be the only way for me to find out what I did for you to cause me to block you on Twitter. Drew was going to check in, but no word back yet. I'm assuming you probably said something on a bad day to annoy me, Sean, to be honest. That's probably what leads to it. Send me a DM over on TGT or my other account or on Instagram, and I'm sure we can chat about it. Vishal says, your thoughts on Tchouaméni to Real Madrid? Mental figure, but looks to be one of the best young French players that we've seen come through. So I'm not surprised when they didn't get an Mbappe that they've gone big for another French talent. Let's wrap things up there. Thank you so much, guys, for tuning in. As always, appreciate the support on the channel. Do drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you are indeed new around here with those notifications turned on so you never miss a show. I will see you again very, very soon tomorrow morning, bright and early at 8 a.m. for the next one. And as always, up the Arsenal.